Right now, it feels like everyone is trying to sell you protein. If you walk into a grocery store, it's slapped on every label. Scroll your Instagram feed, and you'll probably see a lot of cottage cheese or the latest high-protein ice cream brand. And Drew Gooden just made a great video about this, where he basically bought every protein product he could find, and he raised some good points. Like, first, protein products are generally pretty expensive, and two, most of them don't taste great. But here's the thing, eating a high-protein diet does have a lot of benefits, and personally, it has completely changed my life. It's part of what has helped me go from 240 pounds in high school to 175 pounds now, and several years ago, I pushed much lower just to see how far I could go. But I didn't do any of this by throwing back protein shakes, taking supplements, or trying out the latest protein snacks. I'll have an occasional protein bar, but 95% of my weekly protein intake just comes from normal food that I cook at home, which I find is way cheaper and much more enjoyable way to get my protein. And I'm able to do this by following 3 simple strategies that all build on each other. Now, before we dive into the strategies, I have 3 questions that you need to answer, because the way that I use these strategies will probably work slightly different than how you will use them depending on the answers. And first up is, why do you want to eat higher protein in the first place? 2 is, how much protein do you actually need? And the third question that most people miss is, how much protein do you currently eat? Because eating some set of protein per day is not magically going to solve all your problems. You need some clarity on why you want to do this and how to approach it. And I'm going to give you my answers to these 3 questions to just guide the discussion, but they're for example purposes only. None of this is going to stick if you don't figure it out for yourself. So let's hop in. But first, thank you to today's sponsor, Grasso, where if you smell these 3 olive oils side by side, they all have quite different aromas, and because of that, different ways that you should use them in the kitchen, and here's why. First up is their extra virgin olive oil that can be used for cooking, known as Sizzle. And this olive oil is made from 100% Pequot olives, but they're picked at a slightly later maturity, so there's kind of a little bit of a mellower olive aroma, but it has a higher smoke point, which is great for cooking. And this is very different from their second option, Drizzle, which is a finishing olive oil that you probably wouldn't want to waste cooking with. This extra virgin olive oil is made from younger Hoji Blanca olives, so it kind of has this more intense, almost spicy aroma that would be great for finishing on salads or pasta dishes and things like that. Then the last olive oil that has been missing from Grasso's lineup is Frizzle. And this is a neutral high heat olive oil that can be used for searing, deep frying, or baking. And you could use this in place of whatever your typical neutral oil is, like canola, vegetable, or avocado. This is still made with 100% olives, but it's completely neutral smelling, especially compared to these other 2. So if you were like making French fries or maybe chocolate chip cookies, this is the one that you would want to grab. I mean, maybe you could try olive oil flavored chocolate chip cookies. It could be interesting, but probably not in most cases. Anyway, if you want to check out the trio for yourself, you can head to my link in the description or use the QR code on screen to get 10% off your order. And thanks again, Grasso, for sponsoring this video. But now let's ask the question, why do you want to eat higher protein in the first place? Protein is not some magic macronutrient. I like to think of it as a tool that can make your goals easier to achieve. And all humans need some basic amount of protein to survive and support overall body function. Your hair, skin, enzymes, hormones, and immune system are all built on amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Now, the minimal daily recommended is 0.36 grams per pound. So for a 175-pound person, this would be roughly 63 grams or 252 calories worth of protein per day. Now, beyond that, eating a higher protein diet can have added benefits like allowing you to build excess muscle, stabilizing energy levels, and just can make overall diet adherence and weight loss easier, since gram for gram, protein is more satiating than carbohydrates or fats. The thing is, though, protein only helps you achieve these in the context of calorie balance, your training, and what the rest of your lifestyle looks like. So this is where you need to ask yourself, what changes are you looking for? And for me, the answer to this question has changed throughout the years. When I first started in high school, I simply wanted to lose weight, and the real trigger for fat loss is simply eating fewer calories. But by eating higher protein, it helped me feel fuller on fewer calories, so I didn't feel starved while dieting. Then, several years later, after I had already lost a bunch of weight, I wanted to see how lean I could get. So eating a higher protein diet became a shield to protect the muscle I'd already built while I stayed in that caloric deficit. Now, where I'm at today is much more just about general health. I'm not chasing bodybuilding, strength goals, or a specific body fat percentage. I lift a few times a week, nothing crazy. So I want enough protein to hold on to some lean muscle and support my overall health, things like better recovery, stable energy, and just keeping my body functioning well. And this brings us to question number 2. How much protein do you actually need to support these kinds of goals? And again, the answer to this question for me has changed over the years. Still to this day, the most commonly talked about number when it comes to how much protein you need per day to build an optimal amount of muscle is 1 gram per pound of body weight. So 175 pounds means 175 grams or 700 calories worth of protein. But here's why this amount of protein can be problematic for a lot of people. First up, the most evidence-based number for optimal muscle growth is around 0.73 grams per pound or 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, and anything beyond that, there is either no benefit or extremely diminishing returns. And I'll leave links to these articles and studies below. But additionally, the average person starting out and just wanting to lose some weight or get some muscle in the weight room can get great results at even 0.55 grams per day, assuming the other key factors like your total calories, your resistance training, recovery, and sleep are all dialed in. Now, there's nothing wrong health-wise eating 1 gram per pound of body weight or even much higher, assuming you're meeting all of your macronutrient and total calorie needs. But the reason why this amount can be problematic for many people and send them down the expensive rabbit hole of consuming protein shakes, snacks, and bars is that it severely restricts the types of food you can eat on a day-to-day basis. And I learned this the hard way a few years ago. Because you have to keep in mind, the 3 primary macronutrients that make up the calories in our food all work in a push-pull relationship. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories, and 1 gram of protein is 4 calories. So if you try to increase your protein intake while keeping your calories the same, you have to either reduce the carbs, the fat, or a little of both. And what a lot of people do is try to lower our total calories per day and increase the amount of protein at the same time. And this is the exact trap that I fell into a few years ago. When I wanted to see how lean I could get, I started at 165 and was like, well, I've got to do the 1 gram per pound rule. So 165 grams of protein per day. And after like 3 days of trying out that diet, I was like, dude, this sucks. I cannot do it. So I just was like, I'm going to shoot for 120 grams a day and see what happens. And guess what? The difference was massive from a lifestyle perspective. We are talking about 45 grams of protein difference per day or 180 calories worth of food that I can now spend on carbohydrates or fat instead of shoveling more protein. And we're going to get into a lot more examples shortly, but here's one simple one. At 1 gram per pound, if I wanted a burger, I feel like I'd almost have to eat it wrapped in lettuce or something, and then still add a side of plain chicken breast just to hit my protein goal. However, at 0.7 grams per pound, I can now have that same burger just on a brioche bun, which is about 160 or so calories, and I'm still well within my targets. And for me, this made it so much easier to stick to and made the next 5 weeks fly by. And the key takeaway here is that 0.7 grams per pound is going to be the sweet spot for optimal muscle gains. Or if you want a rounder number, maybe just say 3/4 of your body weight. However, even something like 0.55 grams per pound is going to be great for the average person who trains, eats well, has a job and hobbies outside of just being in the gym every day for a few hours. Now, if you want to be a bodybuilder, elite athlete, or strength competitor, like sure, eat as much protein as you want. But for most people, you don't really need to be as obsessed with protein as it kind of feels like everyone is today. In my personal example, it made a massive difference just lowering that target, and I was able to achieve outcomes that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And this leads us to the third question: how much protein are you actually eating right now? And this is the question that I didn't ask myself back then, but I later realized I was already eating around 120 or 30 grams of protein per day while at maintenance calories. So when I shifted into a caloric deficit, all I really needed to do was slightly adjust my carbs and fat, not suddenly try and skyrocket my protein, which makes a drastic lifestyle change. So before you start blindly following someone else's high protein diet that they gave you that works for them, I would highly recommend going on a little self-exploration for yourself. Just grab a simple food logger and maybe track for 3 to 5 days, see how much protein you kind of average out per day. And then once you have the answer to that question, it makes it so much easier to implement strategy 1, which is creating slightly higher protein versions of foods that you already like. When people start eating a high protein diet for the first time, a lot of them will generally swing towards 2 extremes. First is going to be completely cutting out the foods they actually enjoy, thinking, well, I can't have pizza, pasta, burgers, or anything with a high calorie count that primarily comes from carbohydrates or fat. So they'll just avoid these foods completely and find themselves thinking back on the good old days. Or the other extreme is they'll make versions of the foods that they enjoy, but they are extremely high protein and low calorie versions. So suddenly the burger bun becomes lettuce, pizza dough is swapped for cauliflower or ground chicken, cottage cheese gets added to everything, or you start buying chalky protein desserts. And sure, both of these options are going to help you eat a higher protein diet, but personally, I don't find these enjoyable. I want my meals to still feel like real meals. I want to be able to eat burritos, fried rice, or dishes that I just may get in the mood for. I want my pizza to have bread. I want my burger to have a bun. And this is why one of the best skills that I've learned over the years is how to make slightly higher protein versions of foods that I already like. And I've shown this on the channel so many times. For example, I have this dialed in 500 calorie double smash burger made with 93 7-ground beef and a normal bun and cheese. I've made Chipotle style burritos where instead of loading it with a bunch of rice, I increase the amount of seasoned chicken. There's still plenty of cheese, salsas, and sour cream. I've made butter chicken where I still use some butter, but I'm not drowning it in butter. And I've made a higher protein, roughly 600 calorie pizza that is still made with doughs. And in all of these cases, I'm making ingredient tweaks to the carbohydrates and fat amounts that in turn bump up the protein content by anywhere from 10 to 25 grams. And if you do that twice a day or a few times a week, you can easily start to get 20 to 50 grams more per day. And to me, this is just a way more enjoyable way to go about life rather than trying to get rid of foods I already like or just making ultra high protein versions that don't really taste much like the original. And I'll leave a link to a whole collection of recipes that I've used throughout the years if you want to look for some inspiration. And strategy 1 is such a great starting point for eating higher protein. But here's the problem. If this is the only way that you approach eating a higher protein diet, you're likely going to run into 3 challenges. First, your grocery bill can still stay fairly high. Sure, it's going to be cheaper than buying a bunch of protein bars and protein ice creams, but you're still buying specialty ingredients for each individual recipe, and because of this, challenge 2, you end up with a lot of random leftover ingredients. It could be a bag of onions, a few burger buns, a chunk of cheese, or a sauce you bought for one recipe but never use again. And lastly, you become recipe reliant. So even though you have these leftovers, it's hard to figure out what to do with them. So to combat this, we are going to use strategy 1 alongside strategy 2, which is flexible protein prep. And with flexible protein prep, we're no longer making contained recipes. We are prepping protein options that can be used for a variety of different meals. I've broken this down in a few different videos of mine, such as how to cook healthy meals and never run out of ideas, how to meal prep if you hate meal prepping, and how to turn chicken breasts into infinite meals. And there are a couple of variations here and there, but the core idea is always the same. 1, start with a protein, could be chicken breast, ground beef, chuck roast, tofu, fish, whatever you like. 2, season that protein in a variety of ways. You could keep the base neutral, add some different spices, marinades, spice blends, whatever you want. 3, apply that seasoned protein to different form factors. So the same protein can go into a salad, a sandwich, a rice bowl, pasta, tacos, literally anything. And lastly, finish it with condiments and toppings. Sauces, herbs, crunchy things all give each meal a totally different vibe without any extra effort. So instead of thinking in purely recipes, you're starting to think more into modular meal building blocks. And this leads to a lot of benefits. For example, you'll amortize your time and effort. So you only do the hard and generally most time-consuming part once, which is going to be cooking the protein. but this time and effort carries you through multiple meals. And the big difference between what I'll call formal meal prep, where you kind of just make the same meal for the whole week, is that this method forces you to be creative and increase your food variety. Since you're starting with some kind of protein base, it leaves you room to naturally experiment with the leftover ingredients you may have from using strategy one, like that half of onion, jar of sauce, or a few burger buns. And instead of just listing off a bunch of examples, I'll recommend that you go check out the video where I didn't cut anything. I basically just showed how I start with 2 chicken breasts, but then turn them into drastically different meals. And again, strategy 1 and 2 are great on their own, but they're definitely still more geared to maybe helping you eat high protein for a day or maybe a couple of days at most. But the way to make all of these strategies sustainable over the long term is to pair them with strategy 3, the high protein grocery loop. And here's why. Grocery shopping is kind of the invisible force that shapes how we eat. I mean, if you don't have food in the house, you're either stuck making a last-minute run to the store for more cottage cheese protein snacks, or you're just gonna order some takeout. And if every grocery trip feels like you're starting from scratch with a completely new list, it's gonna feel overwhelming, random, and inconsistent. And the grocery loop aims to break that cycle. It's how you build momentum over time. And the key to understand here is that your grocery shopping is not going to look perfect in week 1. But over month 1, month 2, and over several years, this system will build and compound, and your grocery shopping will get easier over time. And here's how it works. So step 1, when you start to put your grocery list together, is to anchor it with general high protein staples. So this could be 1 or 2 proteins you like, a couple of versatile produce options, a couple of dairy, pantry, or spices or sauces, and these are the ingredients that are going to help facilitate flexible protein prep. Then step 2 is to find 1 or 2 specific, slightly higher protein recipes you can make this week. And these are from strategy 1. Maybe it's the high protein smash burger and some braised beef tacos, and you'll likely find that you already have some of those ingredients listed from step 1, then you just need to fill in the gaps. So once you have the list together, you run to the store, cook the specific meals, do your flexible protein prep, and then you'll use up some of those leftover staples and recipe ingredients. And here's where the loop part comes in, because whatever is left from that initial run that you got can become the starting point for next week's list and meals. Maybe now you have some onions left, there's a bottle of olive oil that's almost used up, or there's a sauce you didn't finish in the fridge. And these leftover pieces naturally are going to inspire your shopping list and next meal idea. So you're never starting from zero. Each grocery trip gets easier, more consistent, and more tailored to how you actually eat. And over time, your kitchen naturally kind of fills up with the right kinds of food, the stuff that makes eating high protein simple and automatic. And I don't think of this as like a one-time high-protein grocery haul that is forcing me to stick to this very rigid meal plan. It's an ongoing loop, but ultimately it's an imperfect one. For example, maybe I had chicken breasts written down, but thighs were on sale, or I have a bunch of cilantro left from last week, so I decided to make a corn salsa this week, or maybe some weeks I just find a new hot sauce or sauce to try. And the idea is you're creating a system while slowly building habits that support higher protein eating in the long term. And I've been thinking about doing a dedicated video around this idea of the grocery loop, because I've started to realize that grocery shopping effectively really is a skill, but it's one that none of us really talk about or teach how to do it because it looks so different for so many different people. The tricky part with filming that type of video, though, is I need to kind of film everything I'm doing, not just for 1 week, but really multiple weeks in a row so I can show how that loop builds over time. I want to figure out a way to do it. I just need to find like a full month where I can kind of block off and dedicate towards that type of project. Now we'll save that idea and video for another day, but for now, to round out this video, remember, if you use all of these 3 strategies together and keep those 3 key questions I asked earlier in mind, you should be able to learn how to eat high protein, not just for a couple of days or a couple of months, but in a way that is less expensive, more enjoyable, and most importantly, sustainable for the next 5, 10, 20, or 30 years. But anyway, there will be a bunch of links down below that you can use for inspiration. And thank you again to Graza for sponsoring this episode. But that will wrap it up for me in this one. I will catch you all in the next one. Peace, y'all.